مشاريع لبنان 2020.
وجوب تسهيل مهمة رئيس الحكومة.
إن هذه المعادلة المصر قد ماتت على يد حزب الله بالذات.
We are prepared to strike whenever we choose.
Good afternoon and welcome to the English newscast on Future TV. It's Tuesday, September 3rd. I'm Yumna Naufal and these are today's headlines. Hezbollah leader Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah discusses the latest developments in the region with Iran's Burujerdi. Israel says today's missile launch in the Mediterranean Sea is part of a joint American-Israeli military exercise. And leading Middle East scholar Hilal Khashan weighs in on the consequences of a possible U.S. military strike against Syria. Hezbollah leader Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah meets with the Iranian Parliament's Foreign Policy Committee chief to discuss the latest developments in the region. Alauddin Burujerdi, who is the Iranian chairman of the Committee for Foreign Policy and National Security, says he agrees with Foreign Minister Adnan Mansour that there is a U.S. plot against the region's security and stability. He is calling for unity to prevent what he claims is a possible disaster and expresses hope that U.S. President Barack Obama not rush in his decision on taking a military action strike against Syria. John McCain says that a vote by the Congress against President Obama's proposal for using military force in Syria would be catastrophic. McCain says that he and Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who was also in a meeting with Obama, favored changes in the resolution that would broaden it to make it more than just a response to the use of chemical weapons by the government of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
If the Congress were to reject a resolution like this, after the President of the United States has already committed to action, the consequences would be catastrophic in that the credibility of this country with friends and enemy and adversaries alike would be shredded, and there would be not only implications for this presidency but for future presidencies as well.
Here to discuss matters further is Dr. Hilal Khashan, the leading scholar of the Middle East and professor of political studies at the American University of Beirut. Welcome, Dr. Khashan.
My pleasure.
Obama says he does not require congressional authorization for a strike on Syria, but lawmakers' approval would give him a stronger mandate. So why the postponement?
Well, there are a number of factors for the postponement. One, when back in 2003, former U.S. President George Bush attacked Iraq, he failed to take the matter before the U.S. Congress. And back then, Mr. Obama was a senator, and he criticized Mr. Bush for his failure to take the opinion of the Congress on the issue. There is another reason for it. Mr. Obama wants to give the matter of striking at Syria more thought to it, and he prefers a diplomatic resolution to the crisis. If he is able to get Russian President Vladimir Putin, whom he will probably meet on September 5 or September 6.
Thank you. So far, Russia has not given him a green light, and if they don't, do you think he will still go ahead with a military strike?
Of course he will. He has committed himself to punishing the Syrian regime for crossing the red line that he drew more than 2 years ago. So he's trying to give diplomacy a chance. He wants to see if Putin can get Mr. Assad to step down, even though I'm not inclined to assume that he will be able to sway Assad to step down. Therefore, a strike is, in my opinion, a natural conclusion to the decision that Mr. Obama has become a captive to.
Do you think he will get congressional approval?
Of course he will, because, failure to get congressional approval will become a major catastrophe, as Mr. McCain has said.
You don't expect something that's similar to what happened in the UK, where the House of Lords gave...
No, the UK is a different case because back in 2003, the British accepted the American intelligence report on Iraq without criticism. They took them at face value, and it was later demonstrated that there was no evidence against Iraq. Therefore, the British Parliament today decided to withdraw itself from this matter because they have little faith in the U.S. administration and its hasty decisions.
Russia announced its missile early warning system detected the launch of 2 missiles from the central part of the Mediterranean Sea fired towards the sea's eastern coastline. Now, Israel initially denied knowledge of the missile launch, but soon after said it had carried out 1 joint missile test with the U.S. So what is Israel doing? Is it preparing itself for the strike?
Well, Israel has been diligent preparing itself for the likely of a strike on Syria. The Israelis made it very clear that will not tolerate any violation of their sovereignty, and they have been for some time preparing the domestic front to cope with the possible consequences of a U.S. strike on Syria.
What are the possible consequences of the U.S. strike on Syria?
I mean, regionally, you mean?
Can we start with regionally, and then can we bring it to Lebanon and what you think Hezbollah will do, which is everybody's question? What, will Hezbollah retaliate in if such a strike takes place?
You know, from the beginning, the Iranians said that they trust the capability of the Syrian regime to withstand the consequences of the strike, and there is no need for them to act unless the strikes were substantial and caused severe destruction to the Syrian military.
Do you think they will be substantial?
I think, well, I don't know. I am inclined at this point to assume that if the Americans were to strike, the strike will be significant. Whether the strike is significant or not, I don't think the Iranians will launch missiles at U.S. Navy ships or at Israel. You know, they will always say that the Syrians were able to contain the consequences of the strike. I don't see a scenario whereby the Iranians or Hezbollah would take action against the Israelis in the event of a U.S. strike, because they know the consequences for them would be devastating.
So you're saying Hezbollah and Iran will do nothing if the U.S. strikes?
They will not do anything to harass Israel, but they might. The Hezbollah might accelerate its military presence in Syria and try to deal with the likelihood of a rebel attack in greater Damascus. So Hezbollah will respond on the ground by dealing with the rebels, but they will not attempt to take on the Israelis, because they know what can happen if they provoke a confrontation with the Israelis.
President Obama was talking about a minor strike, and you said it could be a significant strike. Can we define significant, and can we define significant?
Well, significant, minor, substantial, their definition is relative. What can be minor to somebody might be
right,
substantial to somebody else.
What did you mean by significant when you said
by significant, I think they will injure, they will hurt the Syrian army without crippling it.
Right, because they spoke about how Obama said this very clearly. He said he was not really aiming for a regime change. So and you're saying that now he has to go to war, he has to strike, basically, because his credibility is on the line. But Obama is a Nobel Peace Laureate, and you're saying that he doesn't really want to, but now he kind of has to because he mentioned red line. So that's where his credibility comes into question. But if there's no regime change, if he's talking about a minor strike, whether it's significant or minor, then what's the point of the strike in the first place?
Okay, well, 2 years ago, Mr. Obama drew the line. He drew a red line about not using chemical weapons. The regime in Damascus violated this warning and actually perpetrated a number of chemical attacks. The recent one was devastating. And eventually, Obama's thick red line became too much to his critics to accept. Therefore, he found himself in a situation where he had to act. I think when a strike happens, whether it is substantial or less substantial, I think the aim of the strike would be to push the course of events to Geneva too. I completely agree.
Which has not yet taken place, and we're hoping
I think chances are that as a result of the forthcoming strike, especially if the regime in Damascus claims that they were able to sustain the consequences of the strike, and if they claim that it was a victory because they survived it, then they will have a reason to go to Geneva too.
Speaking of victory, in an article you wrote called Bashar al-Assad's Unsalvageable Regime, you said it is highly unlikely that the Syrian conflict will lead to the emergence of victors and vanquished. Do you still believe that?
Well, right. The fall of Assad, should it happen, when it happens, I think Assad is bound to exit the political scene in Syria. The exit of Assad will not bring peace and stability to Syria. I think his opponents of today will eventually end up clashing among themselves until a new mainstream emerges in Syria. The regime in Damascus saw to it that the conflict in Syria assumes a sectarian dimension.
And so the victors would be the United States, basically. And
well, I don't think so. The Americans don't want much headache in the region. For a number of years, the Americans have been trying to get out of the Middle East and focus on the shores of the Pacific. But
it doesn't seem like that's what's happening, because I don't think they're going to be doing, striking Syria if they didn't really want to get involved. They're trying to say they want to get minimally involved, especially after Iraq and Afghanistan. But they're basically dragging themselves into this, aren't they not?
The Americans are not interested in radical change in the region. Look at the course of events in the region, in the countries where there were uprisings. Everywhere we had a situation of infirmity. Tunisia remains unstable. Egypt as unstable as ever. In Yemen, the tribal system remains in place, and not really much has happened since the major protest 2 years ago. And in Syria, I don't think that trend will be any different. I don't think we are going to have a radical change in Damascus. I expect the change in Damascus to maintain the regime in place without its existing figures right now.
Well, Dr. Khashan, you're going to have to come back and tell us more about it next time when we meet. And thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Coming up next, President Michel Sleiman voices his rejection of foreign military intervention in Syria. We'll be back after this. President Michel Sleiman voices his rejection of foreign military intervention in Syria. He instead calls for reaching a political solution to the unrest in the neighboring country. His remarks come during a meeting with the ambassadors of countries and permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, UN Special Coordinator for Lebanon Derek Plumley, European Union representatives, and the Arab League envoy to Beirut. The meeting was held in preparation for an international conference in Lebanon in New York on September 25th on the margins of the UN General Assembly. The conference is expected to discuss ways to provide the necessary assistance to Lebanon to help it confront the rising number of the displaced. Sleiman thanked the ambassadors for their country's support for Lebanon's stability, sovereignty, and policy of the association in accordance with the Babda Declaration. And oil importers will stop delivering fuel across Lebanon tomorrow, but gas stations will individually decide on whether to join the strike planned by private sector associations. The Oil Importers Association says it has been suffering from several problems for a while, including the current economic recession and the absence of a cabinet. The strike action aimed at pressuring Lebanese politicians to agree on forming a cabinet has gathered wide support from business associations, including banks. And on that note, we end our bulletin for today. Let me remind you of our headlines. Hezbollah leader Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah discusses the latest developments in the region with Iran's Burujerdi. Israel says today's missile launch in the Mediterranean Sea is part of a joint American-Israeli military exercise. And leading Middle East scholar Hilal Khashan weighed in on the consequences of a possible U.S. military strike against Syria. Those are your Tuesday headlines live on Future Television in Beirut. I'm Yumna Naufal, wishing you a good night. Be safe.
حبك يا لبنان 2020.
وجوب تسهيل مهمة رئيس الحكومة.
إن هذه المعادلة المصر قد ماتت على يد حزب الله بالذات.
We are prepared to strike whenever we choose.